Hey folks, Rob here. We're going to try something new on the channel. This one's called Spent Casings. So the format is going to be post-mission analysis. So once I play a scenario, either face-to-face or solo, I'm going to do a analysis of it. So we're going to cover things like objectives and orders of battle, as well as special rules that you have to know or should know. And then finally, we'll look at the map itself and maybe figure out some kind of analytical means of attacking that way, tactics, if you will. First scenario we're going to do is OM-1, Morning's Peril. Now this is from Heat of Battle. It's the Operation Merkur pack, which deals with the German invasion of Crete in 41. This is the first of 7 that use the historical map that comes with it. And it lets you link up the 2nd through the 7th scenarios into a campaign, mini campaign. So you can record what went on, who got how many CVP, when was no quarter declared, that kind of stuff. Each of those things is worth points. You can tally them up at the end of the campaign and see who won. We're going to be flipping back and forth, Stu and I, on the player who's playing which side. And this first one, I played the Fall Shoemaker landing my gliders. So let's get into it. All right, so this is what we're going to cover. We're going to look at the scenario overview itself. We're going to do some SSRs, which there's a lot. And then we'll look at the opposing forces, what you have to work with. Finally, we'll look at the map, do some kind of terrain scenario analysis on maybe the best way to attack it, and what Stu and I did in our game. So looking at the scenario overview, the concept is simple. Like I said, it involves German glider troops, members of the Sturm Regiment attacking, landing with gliders, then trying to secure 3 anti-air guns that the New Zealanders are guarding. So there's a, you can just see it on the map here, these funny looking hex side lines. This is a perimeter wire, which is treated much like barbed wire is in Camper Viper, barbed wire fence. So think cattle wire, that kind of thing. So it's just a rough perimeter. It slows you down, does not stop you from crossing it. However, in the course of play, before setup, you're going to be able to put in some breaches, which will give you some quick access points at a cost of half a movement point cheaper. So whether or not you use them is, again, going to be up to you. Scenario lasts 6.5 turns, and with varying degrees of dust in the first 3. So in turn 1, you have moderate dust, which is you roll a 3rd die and have it. Then you round up. And this 2 and 3 are light dust, where you roll an extra die, you have it, and you round down. So you can have anywhere from 1 to 3 of moderate and 0 to 3 with light, with a higher chance of being on the lower end, like a 1. Victory conditions are simple. The New Zealanders have 3 AA guns, 2 of which are already in pits. So you know where they are. They cannot set up HIP, but they can set up concealed. And somewhere in this a 2 hex radius of DD8 is a 3rd anti-air gun, which you have to find, capture, and eliminate. Or maybe your opponent will do it for you. He'll roll a 12 malfit, and then you'll fail to repair it and disable it permanently. Now we say 2 hexes. Obviously, you cannot count these because they are outside the wire. You must be within the wires. So really, you're only looking at 7 hexes of light olive groves for you to hide that AA gun, so you know where it is. Now you can also be brave and hide it on the runway. It just becomes visible the minute a unit has line of sight to it. So it's not going to be able to be emplaced, which may or may not suit your plans. But it is one way to sight the gun. So if you look on a Scenario Archive, they record all kinds of stats. In this case, it slightly favors the Commonwealth, not a lot, 18 to 11. And that's primarily because I think large numbers of German squads are going to be moving in open, and you're going to get a lot of down 1, down 2 shots, even with dust. Maybe not so much the down 2, because the dust will alleviate some of that, which saves the German bacon to some degree. And depending where you put your gliders, you may have a long way to run. So again, we'll get to that when we get to the map analysis part. So here is the SSR information. All OM rules are in effect, which means there's 5 pages of different terrain capabilities, EC and weather conditions that you have to bear in mind. And then they've nicely summarized the key ones directly before the campaign scenarios. So This one in the center here has these 6 rules. These are the ones that are really important. The rest of it is nice to know, and it's going to be working its way into the games eventually anyways. EC are always dry, and at the beginning of a scenario, you're always going to have a mild breeze from the north, but that's only for landing gliders and paratroops. If you're not doing any one of those, you're always going to have no wind. And again, with gliders, I made a video on that. You basically have to land facing into the wind, so there must always be direction. Even if there is no wind, you must still have a direction to land into. Now, the setup order is fairly strict. You have 6 breach counters for the perimeter wire. Each side gets 3, and the German player starts. He puts 1 down, then the New Zealander, German, New Zealander, until all 6 are down. Typically, what will probably happen is your German will pick wide open terrain in the northwest corner of the perimeter, while the New Zealand player will probably put him around the olive groves, keep him out of the way, because obviously it makes more sense that way. So really, you can only depend upon 3, maybe 4 breaches for the Germans to filter through, and you must set them up at least 4 hex sides apart, not hexes, hex sides. So they could be fairly close. You then set up your Commonwealth forces, and again, they have they have limitations. One is you don't have a lot of units, and you must set them up with at least 1 hex in between, so they got to be within 2 or more hexes of each other, and therefore they cannot be adjacent, which means no fire groups. A multi-hex location fire groups, you're not going to be able to do any of that at the mission start. You also have the 2 AA guns in the gun pits, and the third one you can hide anywhere within 2 hexes of DD8. Again, if it's in the olive grove, you can place it and set it up hip, make it a little harder for the German to find. He only has 6.5 turns, so with the first turn reorgan after the landing, it's basically has 5 movement phases to try and filter out the gun, because he must possess it in his last phase so that he can destroy it. So. The one limitation that the Commonwealth has as well is you cannot move or advance in the first turn. Shoot, no problem. If you go berserk, obviously you can do that. However, in your first Commonwealth turn, you will not be able to move or advance. You cannot voluntarily route either. That'll come into play as we get to it. And then after the Commonwealth, you have the German gliders coming down. Things with the gliders. First of all, this is custom to the heat of battle Operation Merkur. They use almost the same gliders as come with the regular MMP mix. However, they have 15 portage points, not 14 like the counter has. Now, this allows you to carry dismantled 81 mortars or Corliss rifles. Normally, those are not allowed on the DFS 230 model glider. It was just too small. They, not sure how they would land those heavier equipment, but maybe they bring them in with a Junkers 52 or something. Don't know. But you must set up with your 13 gliders, and you must have 1 MMC in each glider. Now, you've got 9 full squads, and then you've got a few half squads and some crews that you have to fit for a total of 14 MMC with 13 gliders, and each glider must have at least an MMC in it. So, again, it kind of limits what you can do in terms of organizing your forces. Now, because you're Sturm Regiment, you're also allowed to freely deploy. You can deploy all your squads if you want when they're in the gliders at setup. I would probably advise against that. You maybe want to do it to 1 or 2 just to have some more scouts out to find that hidden AA gun, but you're probably going to need your 548 firepower rather than a 238. So with dust in the first 3 turns, I don't see a lot of use for deploying, but that's just me. Then lastly, you're going to put down the Commonwealth sniper after they've landed. So gliders have 2 phases. In the movement phase, you put it down the ILH. Defender does any light AA. And then you move if you have to, evasive action, what have you, and then you're going to actually land. Landing happens at the end of the movement phase. Once that is done, the landing, then you can put the Commonwealth sniper down, so you're not just wasting it. The German sniper goes down with the after the Commonwealth put their forces on the board. Now, there's some critical rules to know, and it's quite long, and I can't apologize for the scenario designer, but The problem with third-party producers is sometimes they get off into the weeds, and for very good reasons. But it's just more information you have to take on board. So what's critical? There are 5 pages of OM rules, like I said, and they're not, a lot of them are new. It's just more or less explaining things that happen in the unique to the terrain. So, for example, you have one of the rules is on weather, routing and bore sighting, mixture of desert rules with routing, and in this particular case, routing is using the desert rules for that. In which case, as long as an enemy's not within 6 of you, you don't have to route. If there's an enemy within 6 of you, then you'll have to move. Otherwise, it'd be failure to route. So you can stay in the open 7 or more hexes away from a enemy unit. Information on the riverbed itself, basically treated like Hamada. The bridge, I mean, it's a bridge. There's information for if you want to land a glider under the bridge. Why? I have no idea. But it gives you a +3 to your crash die roll. So that's going to really, really hurt when you take that roll. Information on the gun pits. Again, it's basically a +2 TM location. And the airfield itself is been designated with a brown light hue. And as long as there's a white dot, and again, we'll get to this when we get to the map, as long as there's a white dot in the center of it, like in this example here, LL34, it's considered part of the runway. Runway rules apply, which basically gives you an extra -1. So if you have FFMO and NAM, -2, you add it on a third -3, maybe throw in the 9.2 liter that the New Zealanders have, and you could be looking at some serious damage, mitigated by the dust, but try and avoid running on the runway unless you absolutely have to. Most of the rules that I'm talking about point you to other rules, which is, you can understand it. It's not Heat of Battle's rules. It's MMPs, so they can't do it. They can only reference it. So, for example, perimeter wire you can find in Camp-Proof Piper, section 3.1 to 3.4. Slopes, Camp-Proof Piper, 2.1 to 2.54. That kind of stuff. They'll point you to Chapter F, which is the desert rules for things like vineyards and olive groves, and or the B chapter B terrain rules, that kind of stuff. So it's, when it says 5 pages, a lot of it is pointers to the actual rule book, which you may or may not already know. So don't be overwhelmed by the amount of information that you may have. The new ones are really things like the Cretan buildings. So normally rooftops don't exist by SSR and only in multi-hex buildings. With the Cretan buildings rule, they're all stone, and they all have, if they're single hex, a rooftop location. So again, that's kind of unique. There's only one building in our map, so we didn't really care about that. And then the last two to care about are the capabilities and restrictions of each. Now for the Germans, it's easy. Infantry smoke is increased by 2, so you have a 548s have a 4 smoke exponent, which is great. They're not counted as elite for ammo depletion purposes, however, and the rest of this deals with the Junkers 52, the actual plane that landed on the runways, disgorging its troops and such. So most of the Germans you can ignore. You just need to worry about the ammunition depletion number and the infantry smoke. And in the first scenario, you have an 81 mortar, so you have a smoke depletion of 8, and that's it. So you don't have to really worry about too much. The other thing, again, is it points out that the gliders do have 15, not 14 portage points, which means you can carry 81 mortars, and the recoilless in their dismantled forms. So that's one reason why they had to come up with their own counters. When it comes to the allies, generally the same. For whatever reason, they've allowed both sides to use captured German or Commonwealth LMGs without the capture use penalties. So if you find an LMG from either side, you can use it. No biggie there. Cretan irregulars. So these are local partisans that are joined up with the Commonwealth forces. So you might have a mixture of New Zealanders, Cretan irregulars, as well as Greece troops, Allied minor troops. And in this case, you have to worry about the Allied Troop Rule, which just has units treating other nations' leaders as one worse than they are. So if you have a 9-2, he's treated like an 8-1, etc. You cannot have multi-location fire groups from different nationalities. Again, not applicable in this scenario. And as I said, most of these rules you're going to be working them in periodically. All right, so that's enough of the rules themselves. So out of all that mess that I've just talked about, this is what you need to know. You need a summary of the 5 pages of rules. You need to know the routing per the desert rules. Again, as long as you're within 6 hexes of an enemy, assuming they have the weaponry to reach out that far, and there are going to be 458 irregulars for the Commonwealth and 548s for the Germans with LMGs. As long as you're within 6, you have to route, or you're eliminated for failure to route. If you're 7 hexes or more, you don't have to route. And again, lots of open area. You're going to have to learn slopes. There's a lot of slopes in the Hassle map, and they can be a bit much to get hold of. I still don't get them myself. Again, the rules point you to Campcrew Piper for the actual explanation. So if you don't have them, the other source that might be handy is an article from Bounding Fire Productions from Chas Smith, Slopes and ASL. It's available in one of the products. I'm not sure which one it is. So if you're a completionist, you probably have this. If you're not, the other thing I can point you to is Jim Bishop on the internet has a blog. If you don't know his link, I can put that up quickly. All right, just go to Jekyll.com and the Bishop says, and here you'll find everything you need to know about slopes. And he's got a wealth of other articles as well that it would be a good idea for you to get a grip on. Might help you understand things a lot better. So you can see that he's already got, 5 pages on slopes, different aspects, and quite good information if you don't have the Campcrew Piper rules. Basically, slopes cost an extra movement factor to go uphill, half. It may impact your LOS when making fire lanes, but typically it does not impact you. It doesn't make a hex higher. It just, a hex might have certain features which will either help or hinder. Perimeter wire, again, barbed wire fence. You can see the clip I made from down below. This is from the Campcrew Piper. It's basically cattle wire, and it slows you down from climbing over it. It's going to cost you an extra move to jump over it. Unless you have a breach, in which case it's going to cost you a half move to go through the hex side. So, olive groves. Now there are 2 types, and the rules say it. You can see right here. There are 2 types generally. In the game, you have standard olive groves, like in Chapter B. In the Melamine Hassle map, you have light olive groves, which are essentially the same. They give you a +1 TM. They'll cost 1.5 move to move through them, treated like out-of-season orchards for the rest of it, and they're considered a valid route destination when you're broken. Now, it's only for direction of route. It will not give you rally terrain boost, so you're still going to have the +1 to your self-rally attempts. The other thing you need to know for this scenario is light AA and how that works. Now, you have 1 gun that must be AA until turn 3. You can choose to have your other 2 set up in AA or just keep them in the ground roll. And when you switch between the 2, again, on my thing of gliders and my one on air support, I talk about this, how to use light AA. So I refer you to those videos. I'm going to link them at the end. And you can peruse those if you don't know how light AA works. But you need to know how that works and what happens when you switch roles. The riverbed itself will only come into play usually for landing if you don't have enough space up top. And again, we'll get to that when we get to the map. But you need to know how the riverbed functions. It's treated like Hamada. So again, refer to the desert rules, which is not a hindrance, not TM, just a pain in the ass to move through. And when it doesn't say specifically that it's a level -1, however, you can gain crest status with the level 0 terrain that's normal, the green terrain, just like a gully. So by inference, it is a level lower, or it's slightly lower than the adjacent ground. So if you hunker down, you should be fine for line of sight purposes. You need to know dust rules, moderate and light. So moderate for the first turn, light for the second and third turns. And it's quite simple, like I already said. For moderate, you roll an extra die, have it, and round up. For light, you roll an extra die, you have it, and you roll down. Now, on average, you're probably going to roll 2 or +3 for your moderate, and +1, +2 for your light, just the way that the dice works. You're rarely, zeros and threes are going to be rare, but you might have no dust, or you might have lots of dust for the light. Again, for every shot you take, you have to roll a separate dice. So it's not just one die roll, and then you're done. For every shot you take, you roll a third dice, have it, and either round up or down. And lastly, you need to know the runway rules, which, as we said, basically summarize, it's an extra -1. Makes life very difficult. All right, so let's look at the German forces. Now, you have 9 5-4-8s, you have 4 2-3-8s, and you got a 1 2-2-8 to man your 81mm mortar, which, as we said, must be dismantled to fit on the glider. Now, support weapons, quite a lot actually for the Germans. You got a heavy, you've got an 81 with smoke, with a depletion number of 8, and a couple of DCs, 4 LMGs, a dismantled 50, which it's going to be a pain in the ass to deal with, but it's an extra firepower, and you have a single ATR. This will be very good for trying to take out the guns if you want to target them. It's not going to be easy, but if you can target a gun directly, you could incapacitate it without having to go up to it and slap it. You also have 4 leaders, which is a really high ratio, typical for German, 1-4. You have a 9-1, 2 8-0s, and an 8-1. Now, when it comes to the glider, and I didn't find this out till Stu and I started playing, but you can see here we have the Dorsa 230, and you can see the 14 portage points on the bottom left. Everything else is the same as your standard MMP glider. However, the difference again is just the 14 portage points. Now, in order for you to see this, you're going to have to make sure you have the Krita.mdx extension. You get that on VASL.info. All right, so you have to make sure you have this extension here, Krita.mdx, installed in your extensions folder, and that makes available all of the gliders that you're going to need. In terms of unit counters as well, one thing I would avoid doing when it comes to the squad, you have the Wehrmacht FJ. They are Fallschirmjäger. However, the problem with these guys is they don't ELR, and your normal 5-4-8s will ELR. So just remember that you need the Krita.mdx extension if you want to use the heated battle gliders. So let's look at our disadvantages and advantages. Now, you're free to deploy while you're in a glider, so your 9 squads could be deployed. You have an increased smoke exponent, which again, if you look at the counters, normally it's only a 2 exponent. You're going to be increased to 4. Now, you could use the Assault Engineer, again, courtesy, I think it's the latest Twilight of the Reich one, but they've added this counter to the VASL Mix standard, so you could have your 5-4-8 if you're using VASL. Normally, you're just going to have a 5 with a 2, and you're going to have to remember that you have an extra smoke exponent. Your 81, as we said, you can fire smoke or HE. It is very deadly. I won because I was able to assemble this at the last minute and able to get a couple of key shots to whittle away the Commonwealth defense. This thing proved very handy, and I started landing it in the river, so which was probably a poor choice. But if you're a Commonwealth player, this thing is definitely going to ruin your day. You want to try and take it out as quickly as possible. And the same goes with the heavy. A lot of firepower. If you can get your hands on this, maybe even before they dismantled it, or excuse me, assemble it, then you're going to make it a little easier on yourself. LMGs, remember you have non-capture use penalties normally applying, not in this case. You can use Commonwealth LMGs if you manage to capture them. You're going to have dust on your side when you land, but the penalty for that is it's going to affect your shooting itself. And if you're deployed into a bunch of half squads, a 2 with anywhere from a 0 to a +3 dust roll, doesn't matter how many negs you have, you're probably still going to be running a 2 even, and that's sniper bay territory. When it comes to known enemy unit, when you're in a glider, you're not considered known. You're actually treated like you're broken for whatever reason they decided that. So your glider is going to be treated like an unarmored truck, and you put them down. Your units do not take counter form until the advancing fire phase. So that means they're always shooting at a glider, and they're not a known enemy unit. So should, for some reason, they go berserk, maybe you have other troops on the ground already in some other scenarios, and the gliders come in, units go berserk, they cannot treat these as a known enemy unit for that purpose. You're basically just a broken unit for purposes of LOS and such. Now, as we've said already, gliders can carry the 15 portage points worth of men and equipment, and that includes the dismantled 81 and the recoilless. It must be dismantled form to fit into the glider. So let's bring in our cloak and display. Now, if you don't have one of these set up and you play a lot of VASL, I would do this. You can see this. I got a whole list all pointing to my file where I have taken a snapshot of it. And it's much easier than trying to figure out the HTML code itself. So I've got a lot of PNGs, JPEGs, which I can use to show different things depending on what kind of mission I'm running, but very handy. So what you're going to want is your cloak and display, because again, your units are not known until the advancing fire phase, so you're going to have to split up your units and properly using up the cloak and box. So what are disadvantages? Because you are landing in dispersed formation, basically your gliders have to be 2 hexes apart. You're going to run into a lot of obstacles. You're going to be very dispersed. You got to have all your support weapons dismantled if possible. And like I said, you're going to land 2 hexes apart. Now, I'll give you this little tip about gliders. As we said, gliders have 2 rolls. Or I should say there's two dice rolls they have to do. One is a landing, and the other one is a crash die roll. Now, your landing die roll is going to be impacted by a couple of things. All right, and they are the landing color die roll modifiers you see here, and the crash die roll modifiers you see here. All right, so the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to put down all your 13 gliders. You want to pick a spot that's at least 6 hexes away from any obstacle. The barbed wire doesn't count. The olive groves do, and they will definitely ruin your day. The slopes, you can see these slope counters here. We're going to get into this in the map, but these indicate slope. That's not going to impact your glider either. So you want to pick a spot that's at least 6 hexes away from a 1-level obstacle. So in this case, we drop too short. We want to, whatever reason, we want to land at JJ6. Maybe there's a breach in this hex right here. And we look at our landing approach path, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have 5. 5 is a level 1 obstacle, which is as far back as we can go. So when it comes to the landing die roll modifier and your crash, it's going to be very important that you don't have any upper levels. To land in this hex, you need to roll a 1 on the color die. For every clear hex is a -1. And for every full hex is a +1. Full level above the base level of the hex. So things like olive groves, which means for this glider, we have a total of -4, and we have a +1 for a net -3 to our die roll, which means on a 5 or a 6, we are not going to be able to land in our ILH, which is going to impact our crash. All right, so whenever you're landing your gliders, you want to pick a spot that's at least 6 hexes away from this olive grove. So because you count your hex and the 5 preceding hexes as part of your approach path. Right, so in this case, we -1, -2, 3, -4, -5, which means we're going to roll, we're going to stick the landing, as it were. The second roll you have to do is a crash die roll. Now, the crash die roll is very penalized. In this case, you need a 6 or less on a die. And all these different things that you could land in are plus modifiers. If you land in the swamp for whatever reason, it's going to be +4. Hopefully you didn't evade into that. For us, we have olive groves, which is a +2. If you land in the olive grove, you're screwed. And various other land terrain features that you might run into. So again, just pick a hex that's 6 hexes away from any kind of obstacle. All right, and that's pretty much it for the gliders. The rest, I'll cover the rest later on. Now, we said you also have breaches. All right, so we have breaches on our wire. You want to try and pick landing sites close to the breach just to avoid having to run. If you set up over here, you're going to have 1, 2 hexes of -2. You're going to have to pay a half point to get under the breach. So there'll be 3 moved to this location, and you've been attacked with a -2 all the way around. And when you're getting close to an 8 IFE anti-air gun adjacent, that's 16 firepower -2, maybe -3, depending if you're on the runway or not. So very deadly. So it's very, it's disadvantageous to have to channel through the breaches. Now, as we said, you could jump the fence. It's only going to cost you a full movement point, not a half. So you may want to do that. But breaches are going to channel you for enemy fire. You have to spread out your gliders so that there's at least 1 hex in between. This is the kind of thing that I did. I landed right up against the perimeter wire for the first flight. But you have to be at least 1 hex in between, which means you don't have a lot of territory to set up in. And you want to avoid landing on the hex edges of the map board, because if for whatever reason you evade, you land off board, you're not destroyed. You can still come on. However, you're severely limited. So, for example, if this one here gets shot, has to evade, and I roll a 1 for direction and a 6, I'm lying 2 hexes off board. Now, in my advancing phase, I'll be able to exit the glider, but when you're moving off board, there's no advanced move at all. You're only allowed to move 1 hex at a time in your movement phase. So that means I have to wait till turn 2 to move 1 hex, and then because I'm adjacent to the map board, I can now enter. So if I were to pick this hex here, and I'm way over here, you do the math, I've got 6 hexes off board, let's say. The game is only 6.5 turns, and my first turn I'm basically stuck in this location, which means I'm never going to be able to enter the board. So when you identify your glider landings, make sure you try and stay as much as possible away from the board edge. It just makes it so much easier. You're going to have light AA coming at you in the form of 2, maybe 3 guns. And because you're treated like an unarmored truck, you're on the vehicle line of the IFT. So if you don't know what that is, it's this top line here. You look at your firepower, you look at the numbers. So for our 8 IFE AA guns, we're looking at an 7 or less to get a result, which could really hurt you considering the average is 7. So gliders do have a +1 on that. So if they roll a 7, you'll be safe. You're going to have to evade, but at least you won't be damaged. But again, evading is going to hinder your crash die rolls and your actual landing. So light AA could suck. The benefit of the dust is it's going to be modified by that, so that might save your bacon. So the disadvantage is the dust. So it's going to save you when you land. However, when it comes time to shoot, if you have a lot of half squads or crews, you're only looking at 2 firepower with some moderate or light dust. So you're not going to take a lot of shots. You're going to be gun shy, as I was, because you don't want to hit his sniper. He's got a 3 sniper, which is pretty good. And you're looking at the depending what you're moving or shooting, maybe the 1 or the 2 column with a +0 to +3 dust. You're not looking very good for your shots. So if you're going to roll a 1 check, a 3 on the 2 table, then you might trigger his sniper. So you don't want to do that. So the dust is going to hinder your shots coming out. You only care about the 81 for ammo depletion because it has smoke, which is going to help cover your approach. Remember, there's no breeze once the gliders land, so you can pop smoke as much as you want. I was able to smoke off one of his AA guns, and that made approaching it a hell of a lot easier, and it forced him to do a certain action. So we'll cover that. And lastly, you only have a 2 sniper, so they need to roll snake eyes on it to hit, or a direct on the IFT roll for you to get a sniper attack. So you're probably not going to get a lot unless his die rolls are really low, in which case it's probably not going to make a big difference for him that you hit a sniper, because snake eyes are just going to whittle your forces away. And they're Commonwealth, so they don't cower. So speaking of, let's go to the British. And your composition looks as follows. So you have 4.5/8, so they are elite, but they only have 2 smoke exponent, and you only have 4 of them plus a half squad. You've got 2 leaders, a 9.2 and an 8.0, so this is probably best served to slap on your MMG and start whittling away. I think this might be the wrong one. Yeah, so what you're using here is the Browning 30 cal. That's why it looks a lot like the American medium, and you only have an 8 hex range with it. So again, because these things were mounted on various kinds of bipods, tripods, that's one reason why your rate of fire is only a 1. You also have 3 crews to man your guns. Now 2 of them are already on the board, as we said, in gun pits. So these guys cannot set up HIP, but you can conceal them because units for the Germans start off board. So everything in your order of battle can be concealed, maybe not HIP. And you also have 2 dummy stacks to set up as well. And finally, you have 5 foxholes. Now, a funny rule about the Hassel map and the terrain, because Crete is notoriously rocky, digging in is very difficult. So you're not allowed to upgrade your foxholes into 2 squad, 3 squads. You're basically stuck with 1 squad foxholes, and you cannot entrench. So even if you wanted to, you cannot entrench anywhere on the map because, again, the surface is just so shitty. All right, let's look at the advantages and disadvantages. Now, because you're Commonwealth, you don't cower, which is great. You're going to have plenty of 1, 2, maybe even a -3 shots on the runway, especially once the dust clears. So what's probably going to happen is these 2 guns may fall relatively early by turn 3 or 4, I would say. And then they have to spend 2.5 turns trying to find your last gun. And there's going to be a lot of territory that they have to cover, which means you're going to get a lot of shots when there's no dust. So that's really great. Now you can set up everything concealed, as we said, and you also have a dummy stack. Looking at the AA guns, they are 40 long, but more than likely you're going to use the 8 IFE, Infantry Firepower Equivalent, which lets you fire directly on the IFT. Now, that means you're going to lose 1 for your rate of fire, and you limit it to 16 hex range, but given the size of the map, that's still plenty. And depending where the gliders land, coming through the breach, right here would probably be a bad spot. You're looking at a 16, maybe down 1 or 2 shot from your anti-air gun. You can also set up this last gun, as we were saying, HIP, somewhere in the olive groves. Make sure when you set your gun up that you have the covered arc where you want it, because otherwise, the minute you change covered arc, for 1, you're going to penalize, 2, you're going to become visible. So you must set up face in the proper way. Just bear in mind, you're always looking at the bottom right corner of the counter to form the direction of the covered arc. You have non-captured use for the Germans for these weapons. There may be a lot lying about because the squads are going to die. so quickly in the open ground. So there may be a couple of these lying around. You can use them without captured use. And because you're going to have at least 3 breaches on this side, maybe 4, you're going to be able to sight your trenches so that you can get good shots into that channel ground. The bad thing is you've only got 4.5 squads, and they must be set up with a hex apart, just like the gliders. So you cannot be adjacent. One thing that we realized after the fact, Stu's setup was that he had them adjacent. They're not supposed to be adjacent. They're supposed to be set up apart, at least 1 hex in between, and maybe even more. So just remember, you need to set up dispersed. Bore sighting is always NA for all games. And as we said, your numbers are not really great. So even though you know where the breach is, even though you got a medium and a couple of these guns, you cannot bore sight, which again, it would just be an extra negative penalties to the moving Germans. You're looking at a -4 to hit. Yeah, I don't think so. Disadvantages are fairly severe for the Commonwealth. First of all, your AA guns. In order for you to fire, you have to be in the light AA role when you're firing at aircraft, including gliders. Aerial range is always doubled. So this glider right here, if I were to fire at it, is actually 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually 8 hexes away. So if I use the 40 long, for whatever reason, I want to fire on the table, which I don't think you're even allowed to, but if I did, I would right away be looking at the 7 to 12 column because the range is doubled. Right, so just remember that with aerial range, it's always doubled. But more than likely, like I said, you're going to use the 8 IFE equivalent, which means you're firing on the 8 column, and a glider only gets a +1, so on an 8 or less, you're going to get some kind of result. Either you're going to wound it, cause it to evade and not land in its ILH, or maybe even destroy it, depending on what you roll. However, before you can take those shots on the landing turn, you must roll an NTC. Now, again, they're 8, so it's not horrible, but if you roll shitty, there we go, I rolled a 10 for my 3rd shot, so my 3rd crew would have been screwed. You're not able to take a shot unless you pass an NTC. So besides having dust, besides having a +1 on your modifier for your die roll, you also must be an AA roll, and you have to pass a normal task check. So that's going to be very, not difficult, but it's you might miss some opportunities to shoot. One of your guns must be in an AA roll for at least turn 3. So because of the proximity of these 2 guns, you already know where they are in the gun pits. It probably wouldn't make much sense to do that. Use probably your 3rd gun somewhere in the light AA roll. Again, it's hips, so it doesn't have to show it. But the minute you change from AA to ground support roll, obviously you're going to lose your hip status. If you're hip, you can't do squat. The minute you start doing something, you become unhip. Now, you still may be concealed, depending on what you're doing, but it's going to definitely impact your surprise factor if you're placed the wrong thing. So I would put your mandatory 3-turn AA roll on your last gun, because this one will probably be the last one that they go for. Or it could be the first, you never know. And there's penalties for switching back and forth. So whenever you are in AA roll and you switch, you can see your rate of fire has been reduced to 1. Reduced by 1. So if I want to take off my AA status, and say I want to change a covered arc, because you also lose a rate of fire when you do that, my 3 rate of fire 40 long could be down to a 1 rate of fire. So just bear that in mind. You want to try and pre-sight things as much as possible, and you want to avoid penalizing yourself as much as possible. Just remember that there is a cost for changing your role. And again, I'll point you to my air support video for that information. You also have no move or advance in turn 1. So if there's a lot of German units landing in the riverbed, you cannot come up to the edge, take a little peek over, shoot them at them in the open. You're stuck where you are for turn 1. If you go berserk, you can charge. There's no voluntary routing. Should you want to get your leader out of a certain precarious position, you can't do anything on turn 1. And the last disadvantage is the dust roll. If it's moderate dust, and Stu rolled a lot of high dust rolls to start off with, even your 8, maybe 16 firepower adjacent shot could be suffering a -2 with a +3. So that kind of stuff plays into taking your shots. So it's going to suck having dust for the first returns. And remember, it's for every shot you have to roll that die. You don't just roll it once. All right, so with all that being said, let's look at the actual map itself. Now, as I said, this brown splotchy pattern right here is all runway, unlike the one of the geoboards, which has a nice little runway drawn on it. In this case, it's this brown tint. As long as there's a white dot in the center covers the brown pattern, it's a runway hex. So LL9 is, KK9 is not a runway hex, despite the artwork. Light olive groves are always in play for Operation Merkur, and it's treated much like an orchard, basically. It's always going to be out of season, so you can, if you're on a level 1 hill or building, you could see through the orchard, no problem. You'll get the normal line of sight hindrance modifier, but you can see through it. You're also going to have a +1 TM inside the orchard. And vehicles, if you had vehicles, could set up with wall advantage inside the grove. So you don't need a wall per se. You can set up wall advantage inside the hex. So that's very important. And lastly, given the openness of the terrain, they had to have some kind of destinations for route. So you can choose olive groves as a destination to route to. It's not rally terrain, but you could route to that just like it was a house or wood. And remember, because the desert rules are in play when it comes to failure to route, if you're out 7 hexes or more away from an enemy, you don't have to route itself. So that's pretty good. Slopes. Again, look at all the slopes. Whenever you see these hash marks, that is in the downslope hex. So, for example, JJ4 is downslope from II5. Now, I'm not going to get into slopes. There's, like I pointed to plenty of articles. I didn't get into that. The things you got to remember, it's going to cost you a half move to climb a slope. It's going to be a half move to go uphill. Being uphill does not give you any kind of height advantage from the lower hex. And if there's a unit in this location, let's bring in a British unit. All right, and we have a German unit as well. On either side of a high ground, they can see each other. It does not impact LOS between the two. It only allows this guy, because he's at 3/4 of a level higher above the base level of hex, to see over things like walls, and it will impact fire lanes. But generally speaking, slopes are really not that difficult once you get used to them. And in this case here, these two units would be able to see each other, no problem. You're never going to get a height advantage. It just may impede things like fire lanes, and you will get a slight LOS jump because you can see over half level obstacles being 3/4 level high. Again, we have a perimeter wire treated like barbed wire on Camp Grove Piper. It costs 1 plus cost of terrain to cost it, so like a normal wall. It does limit a lot of things. However, if you have trenches or if you're using a armored assault, your vehicle is going to be pushing the wire down. You can walk behind it, no problem. You just would pay the 1 cost to cross that hex side. However, if you have a breach, you're only going to pay half of a movement factor. So again, if you want to move our German unit here through the wire from here, that would be 1, that would be 2. This would be 2.5, and this would be 3.5 to breach that wire. So now you're stuck on this side, and you only have a half move left, so you can't do shit. Otherwise, you can come this way here. Let's start here. We can go 1, we can go 2, 3 for the wire, 4 into the next hex. So you can see the breach saves you a little bit of move, and when you're factoring in slopes, that might be valuable. So just remember that. Knowing where your slopes are, knowing where the guns are, may determine where you place your breaches. And so speaking of breaches, remember we have 6. Now these 3 are the ones that I put down, and they got to be 4 hex sides apart. These are the 3 that Stu put down. Now I imagine most of your games will probably be the same. It makes sense for the Germans to choose these ones because it's closer to the guns. On the other hand, you have a covered approach to the south, which might save your bacon a little bit more. So again, where you want to put them is really up to you, depending where you want to land your gliders. So let's walk through the situation here. Now, in this case here, these are my units off on the right. I need to add another board so I can see it. By the way, if you don't know this trick, you are limited in your what you can see from the board. So you can add another column, and then all you're going to do is find a null board and put it there. And now you can see my slider. I've got more space so I can actually see what I'm doing here. Now, so let's look at our setups. Again, Commonwealth goes down first after the breaches are in play. You can't see what's here because it's under Stu's password, so I can't see it. They're going to be revealed as we come along. But the first thing to notice is that they are placed incorrectly. Now, it's my fault that I didn't catch this until later, because you must know the rules as good as your opponent. When it comes to setting up, sometimes you may want to write notes. But remember, these units are supposed to be at least 1 hex apart, which means they cannot set up like in this fashion. All right? You have to be 1 hex apart. You cannot be adjacent. I should have realized that and picked up on that. I didn't, so that's my bad. Stu should have realized that as well. That's his bad. But don't, just because your opponent forgets to do something correctly, is remember it's your job as your opponent, if you see it, to point that out. Why penalize yourself accordingly? Because if they're adjacent, they could easily fire group your ass, and you already have a hard enough job as a German. So you must be at least 2 hexes apart in order to be placed correctly. German units are set up in their gliders. So here I've labeled each of the gliders in the wrong hexes, of course. But when it comes to distribution of your units, remember your limitation. You have 13 gliders. Each glider must have an MMC in it. And one of these is going to have 1.5 squads. And that's just the way it is. You have 14 squads. You have 13 gliders. You can do the math. And just remember, again, all your weapons must be dismantled whenever possible. All right, so let's look at the situation itself. We enter turn 1. Right here, Stu's placing his anti-air rolls, and then I start putting my gliders down. You can see how close to the breaches I'm setting up. I was going to put a guy here in RR4, but again, that's too close to the edge for my liking. This guy as well, for that matter. Very difficult if it lands off board. He could roll a 6 and come this way, or 1 go that way, maybe a 2 come this way, or even a 5 and come this way, land off board, and just makes my life more difficult. But because I must set up to the west of this perimeter wire, I'm limited on how I can do it. And I have to avoid the olive grove. Remember, you want to have at least 5 hexes behind you, not counting yours. 5 hexes behind you, clear of level 1 obstacles, just to increase your chances of landing. All right, and then I have to put some gliders in the riverbed just to fit them all in. All right, so this is all done in the beginning of the movement phase. And now Stu has to decide, does he do light anti-air? There's a task check he passes. I start doing my my landing rolls. Now I'm looking for a 1 or less on the color die, and what happens is, let's bring that back up. You can see my first one here, I rolled a 2. Now because I think it was this glider here, F, there's 5 hexes behind it, so I'm going to get a -5, which means I'll obviously make my -1. The white die determines, if you fail the color die, whether you overshoot or undershoot based on that amount. So a 4, 5, or 6 is an overshoot. A 1 to 3 is an undershoot, and you move that applicable number of hexes. So when I go through this all, I'm identifying the gliders, and then we should be starting. And you can see I've already lost one glider here. It's got a wound. And wouldn't you know it, this is a glider where I have, that's L. And L was my my half squad with the dismantled heavy. So right off the bat, that half squad is gone. That's what happens when you're wounded. You get casualty reduction randomly, so you may lose your whole force. You get casualty reduced, so there's basically an empty dismantled heavy there that Stu is able to pounce on and destroy. All right, so once your gliders land successfully, flip them over to the green side. Now they are on the ground, and we're still in the movement phase. And then we come to the defensive fire phase. So now all these units can start revealing, and they can start firing on me as a unarmored truck. Remember, I don't exit the glider until the advancing fire phase. And you can see right now the dust is coming into play. All right, I'm going to have to stop it there. For some reason, the log file seems to be corrupted. It's not showing proper things. Yeah, we'll stop it there. You guys can watch the video anyways. I'm going to link that at the end of the presentation as well. You can watch our actual playthrough. It took about 3 hours for us to do. We did that last Friday night, and there you'll be able to see all the moves that we made. Now, again, we did do a couple things wrong. One is the original British setup. Remember, you got to be at least 2 hexes apart, 1 MMC, 2 hexes apart, with any support weapons and SMC stacked with it. And no move in the first turn. So when I wounded this glider and I lost my crew, my half squad to the because of the wound, I had a dismantled heavy. Stu was able to jump down and grab it and destroy it on turn 1. He never should have been in that position, which would have changed probably lots of things because I never would have generated an extra leader. I never would have set up my mortar down here to fire at that squad, and then I ended up collapsing it, walking it uphill, assembling it again, so it could bring some action to bear on his last glider. So there's a couple things that we did wrong that we hope to not repeat for the next one. All right, and that is OM-1 Morning's Peril from Heat of Battle for the Operation Merkur. Again, Germans landing on Crete in 41. First game of a campaign series. This one doesn't count, but it was a refresher for the rules for Stu and I. From here on in, we're going to be playing the actual campaign scenarios that make it up. So you can look forward to seeing those in the future. Hopefully this has been of some import. Editing, I'm going to try and keep this down to manageable time. And I apologize for the log file. It just wasn't working properly. And rather than subject it to that, I won't bother showing it. I'll just refer you to the actual live play video itself, which is up on my channel. And with that, we'll see you guys in the next video. Have a nice day.